Pablo Escobar is the most famous drug lord who ever lived. His name is recognized in every country on earth. His face has been printed on t-shirts, turned into Netflix series, and referenced in thousands of songs and movies. The official story of Pablo Escobar is one that most people think they know. A poor boy from Rio Negro, Colombia, who grew up in Medellin, built the Medellin Cartel, became the biggest cocaine trafficker in history, made billions of dollars, terrorized an entire nation, and was eventually shot dead on a rooftop in 1993. That is the version you have been told. That is the version governments want you to believe. But there is another version of this story. A version that is far more disturbing, far more complex, and far more deeply connected to the most powerful institutions on the planet than anyone in mainstream media has ever been willing to explore publicly. The question at the center of this version is simple. How did Pablo Escobar, a man with no formal education, no family wealth, no political connections, and no legitimate business background, build a criminal empire that at its peak was generating an estimated $30 billion per year and supplying approximately 80% of all cocaine consumed in the United States? How did he move hundreds of tons of cocaine across international borders through the Caribbean, through Central America, through Mexico, and into the United States year after year for over a decade without being stopped? How did he build a network that involved private aircraft, cargo ships, submarines, custom-built trucks, and even modified cars with hidden compartments, all operating across multiple countries, with different governments, different law enforcement agencies, and different military forces? The standard answer is that Escobar was a genius, that he was exceptionally cunning and exceptionally violent. And there is truth in that. Escobar was brilliant in his own brutal way. But genius alone does not explain the scale of what he built. Genius alone does not explain how a man from a lower middle-class neighborhood in Medellin gained access to international banking systems that moved his billions across the globe. Genius alone does not explain how his cocaine moved through countries where the CIA maintained extensive intelligence networks and military partnerships without being intercepted. Genius alone does not explain how Escobar maintained relationships with political figures, bankers, military officers, and intelligence operatives across multiple continents simultaneously. Something else was at work. Something larger. Something hidden. And when you start pulling at the threads of Escobar's financial and political networks, you find connections that lead straight to the doorstep of the most powerful and most secretive institutions in the Western world. Let us start with the banking system, because money is where every secret eventually reveals itself. At the peak of his power, Pablo Escobar was generating so much cash that he literally could not count it all. He spent an estimated $2,500 per month just on rubber bands to wrap his cash. He lost approximately 10% of his cash reserves every year to rats, water damage, and simple decay because there was too much physical money to properly store. Forbes magazine listed Escobar as the 7th richest man in the world in 1989 with an estimated net worth of $25 billion. But having cash is one thing. Moving it, laundering it, investing it, and converting it into legitimate assets is something entirely different. And that requires banks. If this is already opening your eyes to things you have never heard before, smash that like button and subscribe right now, because we are just getting started, and what comes next will change everything you thought you knew about Pablo Escobar. Escobar laundered his money through a vast network of financial institutions, and the scale of that laundering operation could not have functioned without the knowledge, and in many cases the active participation of major international banks. In 1999, Citibank was investigated for its role in laundering drug money through its private banking division. Congressional investigations revealed that Citibank had processed hundreds of millions of dollars in suspicious transactions connected to Latin American drug trafficking organizations, including networks that had been active during Escobar era. Bank of Credit and Commerce International, known as BCCI, was one of the most important financial institutions in Escobar money laundering network. BCCI was founded in 1972 by a Pakistani financier named Aga Hassan Abedi, and grew rapidly into one of the largest private banks in the world with operations in 78 countries. But BCCI was not a normal bank. It was a criminal enterprise disguised as a financial institution. BCCI laundered money for drug cartels, including the Medellin cartel, arms dealers, dictators, terrorist organizations, and intelligence agencies. When BCCI was finally shut down by regulators in 1991, investigators discovered that the bank had laundered billions of dollars and maintained secret relationships with some of the most powerful people on the planet. And here is where it gets deeply disturbing. BCCI had documented connections to the CIA. The CIA used BCCI to fund covert operations around the world, including the arming of Afghan Mujahideen fighters during the Soviet-Afghan War. The same bank that was laundering Pablo Escobar cocaine money was simultaneously serving as a financial vehicle for American intelligence operations. This was not a coincidence. This was a system. A system in which drug money, intelligence, funding, and international banking were all intertwined in ways that served the interests of people far more powerful than any single drug trafficker. Senate investigator Jack Blum, who led the congressional investigation into BCCI, told reporters that BCCI was the bank for the dark side of the world. Every corrupt leader, every arms dealer, every drug trafficker, every intelligence agency that needed to move money secretly used BCCI. And Pablo Escobar was one of them. But BCCI was just one piece of the puzzle. Escobar also laundered money through banks in Panama under the protection of Manuel Noriega, the Panamanian dictator, who was simultaneously on the payroll of both the Medellin cartel and the CIA. Noriega received payments from Escobar for allowing cocaine shipments to pass through Panama and for providing banking access through Panamanian financial institutions. At the same time, Noriega was receiving payments from the CIA for providing intelligence and logistical support for American covert operations in Central America. The CIA knew that Noriega was working with Escobar. They knew that drug money was flowing through Panamanian banks, and they tolerated it because Noriega was useful to them for other purposes. This arrangement continued for years until Noriega became more of a liability than an asset, and the United States invaded Panama in December 1989, removed Noriega from power, and brought him to the United States to stand trial for drug trafficking. You are now seeing connections that most people will never see in their entire lives. If you want to keep going deeper like this video, subscribe and hit the bell icon, because we are about to connect Pablo Escobar directly to the most secretive power structures on the planet. Now let us talk about the CIA directly, because the connection between the CIA and cocaine trafficking during the Escobar era is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented historical fact. In the 1980s, the United States was engaged in a covert war against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. The Reagan administration supported a rebel group known as the Contras who were fighting to overthrow the Sandinistas. Congress had passed the Boland Amendment, which prohibited the U.S. government from providing military aid to the Contras. So the CIA needed alternative funding sources. And one of those sources was cocaine. Investigative journalist Gary Webb published a groundbreaking series of articles in the San Jose Mercury News in 1996 called Dark Alliance, which documented how CIA-connected Nicaraguan Contra operatives had facilitated the flow of cocaine into American cities, particularly Los Angeles, during the 1980s. The cocaine was sold primarily in the form of crack, and the profits were funneled back to the Contras to purchase weapons. The cocaine that flooded American cities during the crack epidemic of the 1980s was not just coming from Pablo Escobar operating independently. It was moving through networks that had connections to American intelligence operations. The CIA Inspector General later conducted an internal investigation that confirmed many of Webb's findings. The investigation found that the CIA had maintained relationships with individuals and organizations known to be involved in drug trafficking, and that the agency had in some cases actively blocked law enforcement investigations that threatened to expose those relationships. Now here is the critical connection to Escobar. The Medellin cartel was the primary supplier of cocaine to the United States during this exact same period. The cocaine that CIA-connected operatives were distributing in American cities came from Colombia. It came from the Medellin cartel. It came from Pablo Escobar. This does not mean that the CIA was directly working with Escobar, but it means that the CIA was operating within the same cocaine supply chain that Escobar controlled. It means that elements within the American intelligence establishment were facilitating the distribution of cocaine that originated from Escobar organization. And it means that the most powerful intelligence agency in the world had a financial interest in ensuring that the cocaine pipeline from Colombia to the United States remained open during the exact years when Escobar was building his empire. Some researchers have gone further and argued that Escobar's rise was not just tolerated by American intelligence, but was actively useful to them. A massive cocaine trade generated enormous amounts of cash. That cash could be used to fund covert operations that Congress had refused to authorize. The drug war itself justified massive increases in military and law enforcement spending. And the destabilization of Latin American countries through drug violence created opportunities for American geopolitical intervention. Whether Escobar knew he was serving these larger interests is unclear. He may have simply believed he was an independent operator building his own empire. But the system he operated within was designed by people far above his level. People who understood that the drug trade was not just a criminal enterprise. It was a tool of geopolitical power. If this documentary is making you question everything you have been told about the war on drugs, you are exactly the kind of viewer we make this content for. Like the video right now and subscribe so you never miss content like this again. Now let us talk about the political connections, because Escobar's relationship with political power extended far beyond bribing local Colombian officials. Escobar famously ran for and won a seat in the Colombian Congress in 1982 as an alternate representative for the Chamber of Representatives. He used his political position to build relationships with Colombian political figures at the national level. But his political network extended beyond Colombia. Escobar maintained relationships with political figures across Latin America. He had connections in Panama through Noriega. He had connections in Mexico, where Colombian cocaine was increasingly being routed through Mexican trafficking organizations. He had connections in the Caribbean, where island nations provided transit points and banking havens for his money. And there is evidence suggesting that his network reached even further into the circles of global power. In Colombia, Escobar's relationship with the political establishment was defined by his famous formula plata o plomo, silver or lead. Take the bribe or take the bullet. He reportedly had hundreds of politicians, judges, police officers, and military officials on his payroll. He funded political campaigns. He built housing projects and soccer fields in poor neighborhoods, creating a Robin Hood image that gave him political cover. But beyond the direct bribery, there was a deeper structural relationship between Escobar's wealth and Colombian political power. Colombia's economy during the 1980s was heavily dependent on cocaine revenue. Some economists have estimated that cocaine money accounted for as much as 25 to 30% of Colombian GDP during peak years. That money flowed into every sector of the economy. Into real estate, into construction, into agriculture, into retail, into banking. The Colombian elite, the families who owned the major corporations, the banks, the media outlets, and the political parties were all benefiting indirectly from the cocaine economy, even if they publicly condemned it. This is the same pattern we see with the global elite and the international drug trade. Publicly, they declare war on drugs. Privately, their financial institutions launder the money. Their intelligence agencies use the trade for covert operations. Their economies benefit from the liquidity that drug money provides. And the men who actually run the cartels, the Escobars, the El Menchos, the El Chapos, are treated as the villains of the story, while the people who profit most from the system they operate within remain invisible, untouchable, and unnamed. The Illuminati in this context is not a single organization with a membership roster and a secret headquarters. It is a description of a system in which the most powerful financial institutions, intelligence agencies, and political figures on the planet are connected through networks of money and influence that depend on the continued existence of the global drug trade. Pablo Escobar was a part of that system. He was perhaps the most visible part, the part that generated the headlines and the horror, the part that built bombs and assassinated presidential candidates and declared war on the Colombian state. But above him, invisible and protected, were the bankers who moved his money, the intelligence operatives who used his supply chain, the political figures who took his bribes while publicly promising to destroy him, and the financial institutions that absorbed his billions into the legitimate global economy. This is the kind of content that will never appear on mainstream media. If you appreciate real investigative documentary work like this video, share it with everyone you know and subscribe to the channel right now. When Escobar was killed on December 2nd, 1993, shot dead on a rooftop in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellin by Colombian security forces working with American intelligence and a vigilante group called Los Peeps, the world was told that justice had been served. The great drug lord was dead. The threat was over. But the cocaine trade did not end with Escobar's death. It accelerated. Production increased. New trafficking routes opened. New organizations emerged. The Cali cartel took over where the Medellin cartel left off. Then Mexican cartels absorbed the Colombian routes and grew into organizations even larger than anything Escobar had built. The financial system that laundered Escobar money continued to operate. BCCI was shut down, but dozens of other banks stepped in to fill the void. The CIA continued its relationships with drug-connected operatives in Latin America and around the world. The political structures that protected the drug trade remained intact. Nothing fundamental changed because Escobar was never the source of the problem. He was a product of the system. A system designed by people whose names never appear in newspaper headlines. People who sit in boardrooms in London and New York and Zurich. People who attend conferences in Davos and Bilderberg and the Council on Foreign Relations. People who control the flow of global capital and who understand that the drug trade, with its $500 billion to $1 trillion in annual revenue, is too valuable, too useful, and too deeply embedded in the global economy to ever be truly eliminated. Pablo Escobar thought he was the most powerful man in Colombia. In many ways he was. But the people who profited most from his empire, the people who moved his money, invested his profits, and protected his supply chains from their offices in the world's most prestigious financial institutions, those people were always more powerful than he was. And they are still in power today. The faces at the top of the drug trade change. Escobar was replaced by the Rodriguez-Orihuela brothers. They were replaced by Mexican cartel leaders. El Chapo rose and fell. El Mencho rose and fell. New names will emerge. But the system never changes. The money always flows upward. The violence always stays at the bottom. And the people who designed the system, who some call the Illuminati and others simply call the global elite, remain exactly where they have always been. At the top. Invisible. Protected. Profiting from every gram of cocaine, every pill of fentanyl, and every dollar of drug money that moves through the global financial system. That is the real story of Pablo Escobar. Not just a drug lord. Not just a criminal. But a cog in a machine so vast and so powerful that even the most dangerous man in Colombia was ultimately just another employee working for people he never even knew existed. If you made it to the end of this documentary, you are someone who refuses to accept the surface-level story. You want the truth no matter how uncomfortable it is. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and drop a comment telling me what you think. Was Pablo Escobar just a drug lord, or was he part of something much bigger? I will see you in the next one.